My name is Jonathan Harker, and the events I am about to recount are so terrifying that they still plague my nightmares. It began when I was summoned to the distant land of Transylvania to assist a nobleman, Count Dracula, in purchasing an estate in England. Little did I know that this journey would lead me into the very heart of darkness itself. The castle loomed ominously on the hill, a monolith of stone and shadow. My carriage wound its way up the serpentine road, the horses growing restless as we neared our destination. The driver, his face pale and eyes wide with fear, refused to go any further. With a shaking hand, he pointed to the path I was to take on foot. "God be with you, sir," he whispered, crossing himself before he sped away, leaving me alone in the encroaching twilight. I took a deep breath and began my ascent. The air grew colder, the wind howling through the twisted trees that lined the path. As I reached the massive, iron-bound doors of the castle, they swung open silently, as if expecting me. A tall, gaunt figure stood in the doorway, his eyes gleaming like coals in the darkness. "Welcome to my home, Mr. Harker," Count Dracula said, his voice smooth and chilling. "I am glad you have arrived safely." I entered the castle, its vast halls and corridors echoing with an eerie silence. Dracula led me to my room, a small chamber with a heavy wooden door and a single barred window. Despite the comfort of the furnishings, an unease settled over me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Days passed, and I saw little of my host. He appeared only at night, his presence sending shivers down my spine. Our conversations were polite, but I sensed a hidden malice in his words. I began to notice strange occurrences. My room was locked from the outside at night, and I never saw any servants. One evening, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread, I ventured out of my room to explore the castle. The corridors twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the labyrinthine structure. I found myself in a long, dimly lit gallery, lined with portraits of grim-faced ancestors. At the end of the gallery, a door stood ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was a library, filled with ancient tomes and manuscripts. As I scanned the shelves, a particular book caught my eye, an old volume on the lore of vampires. My hands trembled as I read the passages, detailing the horrors of these creatures of the night. The descriptions matched my host perfectly: the pale skin, the cold touch, the aversion to sunlight. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see Dracula standing in the doorway, his eyes burning with an unnatural light. "You should not be here, Mr. Harker," he said, his voice a low growl. Curiosity can be dangerous. Before I could react, he was upon me, his grip like iron. He dragged me through the corridors, down into the bowels of the castle. We descended a spiral staircase, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, he threw me into a small, damp cell and locked the door. Days turned into weeks as I languished in the darkness, my hope dwindling with each passing moment. I heard the cries of other prisoners, their voices filled with despair. I realized then that I was not the only victim of Dracula's insidious hunger. One night, the door to my cell creaked open. A young woman stood there, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She motioned for me to follow her. We crept through the castle, avoiding the guards and the ever-watchful eyes of our captor. At last, we reached a small, hidden door that led out into the forest. We ran through the trees, the moonlight guiding our way behind us. I heard the howl of wolves and the unmistakable sound of pursuit. We reached the edge of the forest and found a small village. The villagers took us in, their faces a mix of pity and horror, as we told them our tale safe at last. I vowed to expose Dracula's true nature to the world. But even now, as I write these words, I know that he is still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the night to fall.
My name is Alex Miller, and I have a story to tell. A story that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I recall it. It happened one bleak autumn night when I was driving back home from a business trip. The highway was nearly deserted, the inky blackness of the night broken only by the occasional street lamp and the distant headlights of rare, passing cars. I'd been on the road for hours, my eyes heavy, and my mind foggy with exhaustion. That's when I saw the flickering neon sign of a gas station up ahead. I decided to stop, stretch my legs, and grab a coffee to keep myself awake for the remaining drive. The gas station stood alone, surrounded by a dense forest. Its lights buzzed erratically, casting eerie shadows on the ground. As I pulled in, I noticed there was only one other car, a rusty old sedan parked haphazardly by the pump. The place looked like it hadn't seen a renovation in decades. I stepped out of my car and was immediately hit by the chill of the night air. The door to the small convenience store creaked ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, giving the place a ghostly ambience. Shelves lined with dusty snacks and outdated products stretched out before me. An old man stood behind the counter, his eyes following me with an unsettling intensity. "Evenin'," he croaked, his voice rough and gravelly. I nodded in response, feeling a strange unease creeping up my spine. I made my way to the coffee machine, pouring myself a cup of the lukewarm, stale brew. As I turned around, I nearly collided with a woman who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. She was pale, with hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes that looked right through me. Her clothes were tattered, and she clutched a small, faded photograph in her trembling hand. "Have you seen my daughter?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I shook my head, taken aback by her sudden appearance. The old man behind the counter cleared his throat loudly. "You should get going," he said, his tone more insistent this time. "It's not safe to linger around here." Confused and a bit unnerved, I paid for my coffee and hurried back to my car. As I walked past the old sedan, I glanced inside. It was empty, but a strong odor of decay wafted out, making me gag. I quickly got into my car, started the engine, and drove off. As I merged back onto the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The gas station receded into the distance, its lights growing dimmer and dimmer. But then, I saw her, the woman with the photograph, standing by the side of the road, staring at my car as I sped away. A chill ran down my spine, and I pressed harder on the gas pedal, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. I didn't stop driving until I reached the safety of my home, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, pale and haunted, asking about her daughter. Months later, curiosity got the better of me, and I searched online for any news about the gas station. What I found froze the blood in my veins. A year earlier, a woman and her daughter had gone missing after stopping at that very gas station. Their car was found abandoned, and despite an extensive search, they were never seen again. To this day, I wonder if the woman I saw was real or some restless spirit, forever searching for her lost child. All I know is that I will never stop at that gas station again, and every time I drive by, I keep my eyes firmly on the road ahead, refusing to look back into the darkness.
My name is Jessica Evans, and my life changed forever the day I found the doll. It was a warm, sunny afternoon when my family moved into the old house on Maple Street. It was a fixer-upper, but my parents were excited about its potential. While exploring the overgrown backyard, I stumbled upon an old, dusty box buried under a pile of leaves. Inside the box was a porcelain doll, dressed in a tattered, vintage dress. Its glassy blue eyes seemed to follow me as I lifted it out. Despite feeling a chill run down my spine, I took the doll inside, thinking it was a unique find. That night, I placed the doll on a shelf in my bedroom and went to bed. Around midnight, I was awakened by soft, whispering voices. At first, I thought it was my parents, but as I listened closer, I realized the whispers were coming from my room. The doll's eyes seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. "Jessica. Jessica," the voice hissed, sending a wave of terror through me. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. Frozen with fear, I watched as the doll's expression twisted into a sinister smile. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just a bad dream, but the occurrences grew worse. Objects in my room would move on their own, and I often felt a cold, malevolent presence watching me. I tried to tell my parents, but they dismissed it as my imagination running wild. One night, as I lay in bed, the doll's head turned slowly to face me. It began to speak, its voice a raspy whisper. "I am Annabelle, and you have set me free." Horrified, I grabbed the doll and ran to the backyard, intending to bury it again. But no matter how hard I tried, the ground wouldn't accept it. It was as if the earth itself rejected the cursed object. Defeated, I returned to my room, where the doll sat, waiting on my bed. From that night on, Annabelle's influence grew stronger. She invaded my dreams, turning them into nightmarish visions of fire and darkness. During the day, she whispered cruel, terrifying things, slowly breaking my spirit. I became withdrawn, isolated from my friends and family. Desperate, I researched the house's history and discovered that it had belonged to a family who vanished mysteriously in the 1800s. The doll, Annabelle, was believed to be cursed, tied to the disappearance of the children who once lived there. Armed with this knowledge, I sought out a local priest, Father Thomas, known for his expertise in the occult. He agreed to help and came to our house, armed with holy water and a crucifix. As he began the exorcism, the doll writhed and shrieked, the room filling with a chilling wind. "Leave this child," Father Thomas commanded, his voice strong and unwavering. The doll's eyes glowed with a fierce, unnatural light, and for a moment, I thought it was all over. But with a final, agonized scream, the light faded, and the doll fell lifeless to the floor. The house felt lighter, the oppressive presence lifted. Father Thomas took the doll away, ensuring it would be sealed and buried in consecrated ground, never to torment anyone again. Life slowly returned to normal, though the memories of those terrifying nights lingered. My name is Jessica Evans, and this is my story. Be cautious of the things you unearth, for some secrets are better left buried.
My name is Jess, and I used to adore Valentine's Day. The romance, the chocolates, the anticipation of a secret admirer, it all seemed like a fairy tale. But that was before the horror unfolded. It started innocently enough. I received a beautiful bouquet of roses with a mysterious note attached, signed with only a cryptic initial. Ignoring the slight unease gnawing at me, I brushed it off as a romantic gesture from a shy admirer. As Valentine's Day approached, strange occurrences began to haunt me. I would catch glimpses of a shadowy figure lurking in the corners of my vision, disappearing when I turned to confront it. Each night, I was plagued by vivid nightmares of a faceless entity reaching out to me with cold, skeletal hands. On Valentine's Day itself, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The air seemed thick with an otherworldly presence, and the once cheerful decorations took on a sinister aura. I found myself trembling with an unexplained dread, unable to shake the feeling that something malevolent was watching me. That evening, as I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, the power suddenly flickered out, plunging me into darkness. Heart pounding, I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight, but before I could locate it, I heard a chilling whisper in my ear.
Happy Valentine's Day, Jess.
I froze, paralyzed with fear, as the voice echoed through the empty room. Then, from the shadows emerged the figure from my nightmares, a ghastly apparition cloaked in tattered rags, its featureless face twisted into a grotesque grin. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips as the entity drew closer, its icy breath sending shivers down my spine. Desperately, I reached for anything within my grasp, a vase, a book, anything to defend myself against this unholy intruder. But it was futile. With a bone-chilling cackle, the specter enveloped me in its icy embrace, draining the warmth from my very soul. And as the last vestiges of consciousness slipped away, I realized with a sinking dread that my once beloved Valentine's Day had become a nightmarish curse, a curse from which I would never awaken.